Thank you for joining us today. Hello and welcome to today's nonprofit education series hosted by BPM. My name is Melody Olson. I am a senior manager in BPM's nonprofit practice and excited to bring to you today's presentation on managing a remote workforce during tumultuous times, presented by BPM's own Jill Pappenheimer and Nancy DuBois. A couple of announcements before we get started and as additional people join. Our next webcast in the Nonprofit Education Series will be May 14th and July 23rd. May 14th, we will do a digital transformation in the age of COVID-19, presented by BPM's Advisory Director, Brittany Tompkins, and we will discuss how nonprofits can embrace change and technology in the future. July 23rd, will be our annual ANA update or an accounting and tax update. Our annual and most popular discussion. This session will cover the most recent updates and changes to accounting standards and tax rules. These sessions will be open for registration on the BPM website soon. So if you have missed any of our past BPM webinars, check out our website to find those, including webinars from our speakers today. Before we get started with the presentation, we want to go over a few logistics as well. First, we would like to encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. Please utilize the Q&A function to submit your questions for Jill and Nancy. I will help to moderate these as they come in. And if there are any unanswered questions, the presenters will follow up after today's webinar. After today's presentation, we will also distribute the slides that Jill and Nancy have prepared, as they include some good references and resources for you. So look for that communication at the conclusion of today's presentation. For those of you who have joined us for our Nonprofit Education Series webinars before, you will notice we are migrating or have migrated to a new system. This means the process for obtaining CPE credit is a little different. To receive CPE for this webinar, you will need to listen for and write down 5 code words throughout the webinar in order to receive CPE credit. At about 5 minutes before the end of the webinar, you will receive a SurveyMonkey link. You will need to type in each of the code words and submit the survey in order to receive CPE. The expectation is that you complete the survey as soon as you receive it. We will only leave the survey open until half an hour after the class ends, and CPE will not be granted after that time. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today Jill Pappenheimer and Nancy DuBois, who head BPM's HR consulting practice. Jill, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Melody. Welcome, everyone. So glad you can join us today. My name is Jill Pappenheimer, and I am a partner at BPM leading our HR consulting group. And our team is about just under 20 people and all mid to senior level HR consultants helping small, medium, and large organizations, nonprofits and for-profits with their HR function. Ideally helping to elevate it, to make it more of value to the organization, from complete outsource to project-based support. And I've been in HR for a long time, over 30 years, I'm aging myself, and have seen it and heard it all, but still love to support people in an organization and look forward to really giving you some valuable information today. At this point, I'll let Nancy introduce and then we'll get into the agenda.
Thanks, Jill. My name is Nancy DuBois, and I'm the Managing Director of the HR Consulting Group at BPM. I've been doing HR a little less than Jill, but about 20 years, so still a good amount of time, both in the corporate world and more recently in the nonprofit world. So I have a really good grasp on nonprofits and sort of the differences and how we want to do things slightly different, and looking forward to working with you today.
Okay, so a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So the agenda is really going to cover both the tactical aspect of how to manage remote workforce during this pandemic and beyond. So we're really looking to help you establish a remote work footprint so that it's not just through this very unique time where everyone is 100% remote and you have to figure out how to maneuver and support employees, but really thinking about this from a long-term standpoint about how this can be a very impactful and powerful way, remote support of your organization to carry that forward. And so we're going to talk about policies that are important. We're going to talk about practices that are important. And then we're going to come back together and really look at managing people during this time. So hopefully the content will be fluid, and we encourage you to ask questions so we can really make it meaningful for your nonprofit organization. So ideally, remote work will allow to have your organization increase productivity, increase job satisfaction from an employee standpoint, to the point where, you know, aside from the increased productivity and the job satisfaction, we think employees really like this remote work footprint and like working from their homes, not having to commute day in and day out, having this additional time on their hands. Of course, maybe not having the children or the elderly parents in the background might, be preferred, but, we're working with what we have. And then to not have the physical buildings that you have to support from a cost perspective would be ideal, I would imagine, if we can really get this remote work concept down to the point where it's really done well. So hopefully you'll walk away from or think after this presentation, you might not be walking away, but you will think further about, wow, this is hopefully really powerful information that can help us in engaging with our people going forward. Okay, before we really get into policies and practices, I want to be able to have you be thoughtful about thinking about your people first. So what does that mean? So important to continually tune into, and for your leadership and your managers to continually tune into the concept that employees have a lot of fear. They may be lonely, they may be all alone in their apartment, they may have anxiety and are dealing with a lot of stress. I guarantee our employees, whether for our company or your nonprofit, they are dealing with situations that they haven't dealt with before. And so it's so important to honor that and really think about that in terms of we may be engaging with each other at this time in our lives in a way that is different, that may then carry over to the next phase in our lives. So I would like to think that this period is really going to allow us to be more compassionate with each other. And I think nonprofits are already very good at that, in just having that mission-driven connectedness. But I would encourage you to take it to the next level and really allow people to speak about what's on their minds, or to start a meeting with connection before content. So maybe that becomes your norm. Every time you start a meeting, you say, okay, it's connection before content. What do we need to talk about in terms of asking a question to set the stage for that, where people can talk about something personal? Or maybe you ask an open-ended question. The challenge, and we did this recently with our team, the challenge with asking an open-ended question such as, let's start the meeting with having people be able to share what's on their mind, anything you want to talk about, is that people may share some really sensitive, emotional items that are going on for them right now, and they may start crying. And are you comfortable allowing that? And so just be thoughtful about that. But we do encourage that way of connecting with each other versus just getting into a meeting agenda before you start. And then be sensitive to the fact that we're all dealing with care issues, and it's not just that the kids need to get their homework done and off the video games, but also taking care of young kids or teenage kids. They're all challenges at various levels. And we may have elderly parents at home, or just being worried about elderly parents in a care facility. So being sensitive to those issues for people. And then I'd like to suggest that we really promote staying healthy at this time more than ever before, and encourage that our employees be physically active, get up and move around, maybe start a meeting by mentioning halfway through you're all going to get up and stretch. Maybe even I know people who are leading guided meditation at the beginning of a meeting. So really think about the mental health of people as a way to start a meeting or maybe break up a meeting, but ensure people are moving. Also, I want to recommend that if you're not already incorporating expanded EAP, employee assistance programs, in your benefits offering to your employees, to look into that. The EAP refers to having access to therapists. And this is really a good service for employees to have, one that I guarantee they'll take advantage of if given the opportunity. So it may be included as part of your benefits option, so talk to your broker, or you could potentially add it if the organization could afford to add that component. So I encourage you to look into that. This next slide is really just one that you can reference. Feel free to make available to your organization, your employees in your organization, as options for exercising. So we've distributed this here at BPM and people really appreciate it. So I wanted to make that available to you if it's helpful. Okay, at this point I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to talk about practices and then the application of policies.
Thank you, Jill. So practices that you should have in place. One thing I wanted to mention before we start here is that I've been working and managing a remote team now for the past 3 years. Our consultants have always been remote. So a lot of these are coming from things that we do ourselves and have learned and done and changed and done differently over the past 3 years. So this shelter in place for us was very similar. I mean, not much has changed. And so we want to make sure that we were able to share all of this with you as well. So visual connectedness, that's super, super important. Making sure that you're actually getting on the video and not just making a call. People need connection and people need to see each other. So really important not only to be able to have good conversations, but to make sure you're picking up cues. We've all, had issues with email in the past where you don't get tone and you don't get various cues. So the visual piece of this, if at all possible, is very, very important. And especially when you're dealing with very, very complex ideas. The other thing I would say is, not everybody is comfortable speaking in this kind of an environment. And so for best practice for inclusion is always to ask people questions and include them in the conversation. So if you're not visually looking at somebody, it's very difficult to do this. But when you are and you're looking at them and you see that somebody's not really participating or something's going on, you might be able to bring them into the conversation and help them feel more comfortable with the video. So rituals and norms are really important to develop for this period of time. I've seen a lot of people doing video social gatherings. So every, Thursday at 4 o'clock or whatever, they're getting together. Anybody who can in the organization will join. They'll, tell jokes and play games and have fun. And it's sort of like, when people stand around the water cooler and have, quick visits. So people can come in and out, stay as long as they want. Other things like Quiet Fridays. I know an organization that has implemented this where nobody sends emails on Friday between 1 and 5 o'clock. They'll schedule their emails to go later unless it's an absolute emergency. But giving people time, especially at the end of the week, to kind of calm down a little bit, get some work done without being, bombarded with lots of emails, which we all get all the time. Some people are including families and pets and children and costumes, which I saw on our video, which was very funny. So whatever you can do to make it feel more normal and feel more fun is really important. And that really needs to start with all of us in HR. And it's important to just establish norms, so not to dictate, this is what you need to do. Not always the best way to implement, especially in nonprofits, but making suggestions, talking, including other people, gathering information, making suggestions to your leadership team on what you think those norms might be, and we'll talk about some of those on the next slide. So match the message with the medium. Really important to think about this. And if you've ever sat in a communications class, best practice in communication and it is always important, and it's extremely important now. So if it's a very complex call, put it on video, have real-time communication, make sure that somebody understands what you're asking of them. Let them ask clarifying questions, but do it over video so you can see and hear each other well. Constructive feedback and difficult messages should not stop because we're working at home. And I know that sometimes it's very difficult to get managers to give this feedback anyway, even when you're in the office. And it's up to us to make sure that this kind of messaging continues on through this process. It's the most fair thing you can do for the employee, and it helps people to course correct and to be able to do the job that you're asking them to do. And of course, that feedback, it can be constructive, but it could be good feedback also, letting people know what they're doing right and how well they're doing. Again, video is great so that you can see body language and visual cues that come across. So I really encourage you to make sure that feedback is continuing through your managers to employees. Something that's small or non-urgent, sure, you can use various tools like Slack, you can send a quick email, instant messenger. There's lots of ways to send a very quick message, and you don't need to get on a video call to do something like that. And then, miscommunications happen in the best of times. They happen when we're in the room together, and they're gonna happen even more when you're remotely. So making sure if that does happen, get on a call, get on the video, clear it up, talk about it, agree about next steps, and then move forward. And then I know that Jill put this in here because I have trouble saying it. Quick quips. So, I'm not a fan of text in the workplace anyway, but it's okay to use text here and there if you have something very, very quick that you want to that you want to get across. The last thing I want to say on this, it's super important to remember that all of this is still discoverable. So emails and communication and texts and Slacks and all of this stuff, it's all discoverable just as it always was before, but you're doing it more now. So be very careful about what you're saying and make sure to encourage your managers and your employees to make sure that they are using these forms of communication appropriately. Okay, when and how should I communicate with my remote team? Something I do every day, more often than you do before, because people are not stopping by your office to talk to you. People are not seeing you in the lunchroom. So make it a point to have weekly touch calls with people, with your direct reports, with any committees that you might be on, regular weeklies, and then encourage people to also get in touch with you during the week. So as often as people need to speak with you, make sure that you can be available to them. It's really, really important. And I can tell you from managing up to 16 people remotely, these weekly touch calls are super critical to me. And I could probably tell you everything that's going on within the organization just from these calls. So very, very critical piece for you. Help employees to maintain boundaries with work. We are seeing this in our consulting practice quite regularly now, that Monday through Friday has become Monday through Sunday. And people will say, oh, well, you want to just talk on Sunday? I mean, I'm home anyway. And Somebody says, sure, why not? And employees will feel compelled to do that if they're asked. So it's a stressful time. It's a really difficult time now. So let people work their regular hours, encourage them to stick to those hours, encourage your managers to stick to those hours, because it's very, very easy to slide into working 7 days a week, and we don't want to end up with a bunch of people who are really burnt out. Again, messages, send it during the business hours or use a delay. In Outlook, you can put the delay on it because employees feel compelled to respond. And so don't give them the opportunity to respond late at night unless it's some kind of an emergency. Just try to, work within the hours that are normal for your work environment. Hopefully you've all seen an increase in communication from your leadership. And that's super, super important for people to hear from their leaders. This is the time for your leaders to really shine. Having that communication come out in different ways, could be video, it could be emails. It's super important to be able to highlight them and to help them to communicate what's going on in the organization, to be really transparent about what's happening, to give people a chance to ask leaders questions, and to just be able to show your employees that leadership is on this, they're working on it, they're trying to be transparent. Very, very important, especially in the nonprofit world. We all want to strive for transparency, and this is the time you can really help your leaders shine. Clarification of communication becomes even more important, which I never thought we would ever have to say because communication is so important. But making sure that your emails are really concise and really clear. You don't need to have extra words. You don't need to go overboard, just very clear and concise. Something that I think is underrated is the use of subjects, using very clear subjects so that you can look at the subject lines and know exactly what it is that is going to be in the content of that email. Especially now with so much more email going on, it's really great for people to be able to look down at their subject lines. So reminding people of that.
And Nancy, can I just jump in here? Interesting opportunity also to do some training and create some guidelines around communication, and maybe even teach people about the CCing the person who made a connection for you on a subject, but doesn't necessarily need to be included on all the communication, right? So this is maybe an opportunity here to really shift the way your employees are communicating over email and teaching them the best practices around communicating over email.
Yeah, super, super important. And along with that is the reply versus reply all. I know that this is, it's a norm in certain organizations to hit reply and some hit reply all. And then when you're hitting reply all to things that maybe don't need to reply to the entire organization, like a thank you or something like that, good to decide how you want that process and to include that in here, because a reply all where you're saying just a bunch of thank yous can sometimes really clog up your email from getting the things that are really important. But again, depends on the norm of your organization. And then again, like we talked about earlier, video conference over phone. I'm a big proponent of using the phone, and I always have been, even when I was in-house. And I would have people say to me, if my phone rings, I always know it's going to be you because nobody else calls on the phone anymore. And maybe I'm old school in that way, but I think there are so many times you can get things done quicker, easier on the phone, without having any miscommunication over email. So don't be afraid to use the phone or of course, the video conference. So this is a funny little cartoon that Jill put in here. This is a Jillism, I call them. Of course I watch television while I work. Why do you think it's called telecommuting? So here's what I would say about this. There are some people who work better when there's a TV on, or there's a radio on in the background, or there's something going on. And in the past, that managers would get upset about that. And when you're working remotely, it makes it even harder to manage whether or not somebody is actually getting work done or they're watching television. So what I would say is remember your best practices on inclusion here. So inclusion meaning somebody may work better that way, and if they do, and they're still getting their job done, great, have at it. Let them do that. Don't come down on them for that. It's fine to have a discussion about that, but make sure that they're actually able to be productive in whatever way works for them. And I think that's coming out so much more now that people are working from home because they're able to work hours that work better for them and in different environments that may be better fit for them and they may be more productive. Thank you, Jill, for that cartoon. That was a good one. Okay, remote policies. So do you need new policies or do you need to adjust your old policies? Probably. And every one of you is different. Every one of you has different policies in place. So yes, taking a look at what you have or what you may need for this period of time is important. A work from home policy might be a little late right now. If you didn't have one, you may have just added one, which is fine. If not, we don't know how long this is going to go on. We don't know what's going to happen going forward, if there will be more people working from home. So really good idea to come up with some kind of a work from home policy and making sure that you identify the equipment that people are going to need. My guess is we're, 6 weeks into this now. You probably have done this. You have identified the equipment. People are probably working from home, but really good idea to follow up with them. Make sure that everybody has what they need. Make sure there's not something that you could provide for them that would make a big difference in their day. So following up on that, we're getting a lot of questions about people using personal devices. And really that kind of depends on your IT department and the support that they would provide, any security concerns that are going on. So that's a discussion with your IT department and discussions about whether or not there needs to be equipment that's purchased and budgets and all of those. So you can identify those issues and speak with leadership about them because they're probably coming up for you now. And as always, coordinate with IT. I was in IT for many, many years before HR. So my slides are always very IT heavy because I know how important it is for HR and IT to work well together. And so making sure you have that good connection, I think is really, really valuable. So timekeeping, this is a big one now. Non-exempt employees, those hourly employees still need to keep their time. Either whatever process you were using, whether it was manual, whether you're putting into a system like ADP, non-exempt hourly employees still need to keep their time. So you maybe want to do a check on that, make sure that managers understand this, make sure that managers are approving any time, any overtime, all of those processes that you may have had in place or may not, you need to think about that. If you don't want overtime, you don't want people to work overtime, and you hadn't said that before because people really didn't, now that they're working at home and starting to work longer, you may want to put a policy in place and put that out there. There are many, many different time tracking options. And it's never too late to implement one of these. We do this all the time for our clients because it's tricky in California to make sure that you're tracking time the right way. So, any kind of system that you're using or want to implement, now may be even a better time to do it if you're working remotely and have some more bandwidth for that.
And I just want to jump in here that keep in mind that even though employees are not in an office, if they're non-exempt, they still need to be taking meal breaks and taking those breaks. And so maybe a time and attendance tracking option is something you want to implement at this time to ensure that's happening. So that's just something to consider.
Yeah, actually super important because, the burden of proof for time is on the employer. And so you need to show that non-exempt employees are clocking in, clocking out for lunch, back in, after lunch, and then out at the end of the day. So if anybody out there is doing an auto deduction of 30 minutes for lunch, that needs to be changed and implement a new policy immediately, because that does not show the burden of proof. So thanks, Jill. That's correct. Just make sure that they are showing all of those. You don't need to show the breaks, which you probably know, but definitely the lunch hour. Exempt employees, this is really tricky, and we're getting lots of calls on this because in some cases, exempt employees' hours are being reduced. And you have to make sure, if that's happening, that you're still meeting the minimum qualifications to be an exempt employee. So the salary requirement is still there, and the paying, we're paying, if somebody works during that week, you've got to pay them for that week. So we have lots of experience in helping clients do this, and make sure that you remember that if you're changing their hours and reducing their schedules, that they still need to either stay exempt as long as they're meeting those, or go to a non-exempt hourly employee, which some organizations are choosing to do for this time period. Everybody is just going to non-exempt hourly. I've been screaming ergonomics since day one. Jill's very tired of hearing me, but we have been all over this because most people did not have setups at home like we did. We work remotely. We all have this in place already. But now people are working on their couch, they're working at their kitchen table, they're working on a laptop. And so the ergonomics and the workers' comp claims are really something to pay attention to and to get in front of. We've listed a really, really good website here. And if you go to this, you'll see it will tell you exactly how you should be looking for your monitor, how you should be sitting, your placement of your arms. So I would highly recommend you send this out to people, that you're more proactive in this piece about ergonomics rather than reactive, because it will definitely come back if you're not addressing this up front. And then expense policies. So you may have some expense policies in place, but there may be additional expenses that need to be incurred because of people working from home. So for example, many of you are probably already abiding by Labor Code Section 2802, which states that organizations need to pay for equipment that their employees are using to do their regular responsibilities. So things like cell phones. And an organization is required to pay some portion of somebody's cell phone if that employee uses that cell phone and are required to use that cell phone for work. Well, this probably, we think, extends to this period of time. So people are using their own internet. They may be using their own computer. We're not sure. They may be using a device. Whatever that is, it may be worth talking to your leadership about how you reimburse for those. You could take one amount and say that we'll give everybody X amount, which will count for their cell phone and their internet or whatever, or you may want to do that individually. So just a very important piece to remember, that to abide by the law, you are required to pay for those expenses, even if the employee didn't ask you to. It's just, if you're aware of it, then you need to comply with the law. So the policy should, of course, be in writing. It should be sent out to all employees to make sure that they're very, very clear on that. And then there are some emergency travel items that may need to be in place for this period of time. Most organizations have stopped travel, but there are still some essential workers that are still traveling. And so you may want to add policies in, like, what to do when you're in an airport, or what you want them to do in order to maintain their health. You may want to provide masks. You may want them to stay at certain places. There's lots of different things to think about around this, and if an employee is working for you and they're an essential worker and they need to travel, then you want to do whatever you can to help them travel in a safe way for your organization.
So Nancy, before we move off this slide, we have a question. What would be an appropriate allowance for personal device use?
That's a good question, and one that really depends on the organization. So I know organizations that will reimburse $20 a month. I know some that have done $150 a month just for cell phones. So it kind of depends on the organization and what you're doing now. If you're not doing anything, then talk about what all the different pieces are and what feels appropriate for your organization. It's, a small nonprofit is probably going to be different than a larger nonprofit. $25 is perfectly fine. People use their cell phones and their tablets and maybe even their equipment for other things. This is only reimbursed for the time that they're using it for work. So make a decision based on your organization and your budget, the various pieces that go into it, and don't be afraid to do a small amount or a larger amount, based on what works for you. The key is adhering to the law and reimbursing something.
And can you clarify, does that law require paperwork backup for that reimbursement to be received, or is it just go ahead.
So most organizations will have you have the employee put this in an expense report and include a receipt, so your cell phone bill. There are some organizations that just automatically do this, that just put it back and pay in their paycheck. I'm not a tax expert, but I know there are tax implications around this. So I would say before you make the decision, speak with your accounting group to talk about the best way to do that regarding taxes.
Okay, and then I think go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to say, you could have employees itemize their expenses, or you can have as an employer decide that you're just going to cover a flat amount on a monthly basis, for example, or in each paycheck. So, and both of those are okay.
And then since we're a month or so into this, would this be retroactive? And then just to confirm, it doesn't need to run through payroll, it can be paid elsewhere.
Yes, it should be retroactive, and it can be paid just through expenses, through an expense report.
And I think we just got a question, and I'm sorry that there was a lot of questions this prompted, so I think this is a great conversation. Does federal law require this, or this is state specific?
This is California.
Okay. And then we're saying that because the California state is requiring that these costs be paid for employees, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for the questions on that. Please let me know if there were any questions that I missed on that.
And if you want to get more information on it, you can just Google Labor Code Section 2802, and you should see the information on that.
Okay, so we're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about managing employees, good management, what this can look like. And I want to just pose this as a question to you. What if in a 100% remote environment, your managers became great coaches? Your employees wanted to stay more than ever with your mission-driven organization, that behavior got addressed and positive behavior got reinforced, and your culture developed a cadence of innovation and connectedness, and there was a sense of belonging that came from as an outcome to how you are supporting people during this 100% remote environment. Okay, so this whole section here, these next 3 slides specifically, we're going to talk about that remote management is good management. So let that sink in. Remote management is good management. And so what do I mean by that? So through this next section, hopefully you'll have a different perspective on, or be thoughtful about, how you are supporting employees in terms of how managers and employees are talking to each other, how your environment and your culture is from an aspect of being able to connect people and align people, and come away with some good tools to really shift the conversation here, that you may want to go back to leadership and say, okay, let's think about this differently. So this first component here is from a management standpoint. So what does good management look like? Well, the ideal scenario, and one where, especially in this remote environment, you want to make sure that the conversations are happening and employees are never feeling like they don't understand, one, what they are responsible for, or two, how they're doing within an organization. So there needs to be this cadence of regular feedback that occurs. And Nancy talked a little bit about these meetings should be one-on-one with your manager and employee once a week. I would argue that that's more of a tactical conversation around the work that's getting done that week, where there's a second conversation that should be performance-based. How am I doing overall? Am I staying aligned with the objectives that I've been set, or the goals that have been set for me? So there's two components to that communication. There's the work that's getting done. What are the obstacles that I'm dealing with on a week in, week out basis, day-to-day basis, and then there's the larger conversation. So ideally, you're creating through this good management, and I would argue good leadership should also be substituted here, in creating an agile work environment, because you want to be able to course correct when you're dealing with changing environment that we're in right now, right? So your mission may end up being tweaked as a nonprofit as we're going through these changing times. I know we're talking to clients about this kind of thing regularly, right? So what we were doing yesterday may not be our focus and our initiative tomorrow. And so creating an agile environment where you're able to shift your organizational objectives and initiatives, but also create that alignment with people so that everybody's sort of marching in the same direction becomes so important. So being able to be agile, what does that really look like? And we'll get into these a little more as we go through. So in terms of the work that's getting done, I really, really want to encourage not to create a micromanagement environment, which I know it's our tendency when we're not in front of people, and we probably have a lot of questions about the work that's getting done. And we got some of these questions submitted when previous to the start of this. So I know this is on your minds, is, okay, we're doing, maybe we have people working a reduced week. How do we know that the employees that are doing this work are actually focusing on the work that needs to get done? How do we keep people accountable? How do we ensure that they're not just sitting home and watching TV and getting paid for that time? So, you know, as much as we want to not micromanage, we do need to get comfort that and know that we are comfortable knowing that our employees are being productive. So how do we do that? And that's a really good question. I would argue that you need to shift to measuring that work by encouraging employees to be outcome-based in how they are talking about the work that gets done and how you are talking about the work that gets done. Shift it to being more outcome-based versus task-oriented. So another key component to that is creating measurement criteria so that you know that the employee knows what success looks like. So what does it look like if you're behind on something that you're working on? What does it look like if you're ahead? So those kind of conversations need to happen so that the employee knows what that measurement criteria is and can be held accountable to it, and the manager knows what it is. And most ideal situation here is for the employees to determine what that measurement criteria is for themselves. And there should be a dialogue, but they need to participate in creating that measurement criteria. So goal setting obviously is a key piece of that. So how can you maybe have your non-exempt employees who are working on an hourly basis? Maybe you didn't have them setting goals before. Maybe you want to consider having them set goals now and setting that measurement criteria for themselves. So there's different ways to gather this information on what employees are working on. You can do a weekly status report. You can have them make a list, or you can put in tools in place for capturing that information. I would argue that maybe a weekly status report becomes a little bit burdensome, but it is one way to manage that information. So we'll come back to this and talk about this from different angles. On to the next slide. So how do I address performance? So we talked about this a little bit before, and the difference between the conversations happening weekly versus monthly. So I would argue that performance conversations, monthly conversations, are the most ideal. And maybe it's every 6 weeks, maybe it's every 2 months, but the annual performance review was and doesn't work, right? And it is not a process that works, because you're looking back for the past year and trying to remember what somebody worked on and what you thought about them 10 months ago, and the work that they were doing. It's not about, it shouldn't be about them, but how they're doing in terms of performance. So that, I think there's been enough out there, and people are pretty clear that annual reviews don't really work anymore, because you want to be having ongoing conversations that allow you to course correct. And you want to be setting clear expectations to ensure that people understand what they are accountable for. Maybe that even means having employees, as things change for your organization and as priorities change and as goals change, to make sure that they're setting those expectations for themselves, as opposed to the manager telling the employee what they're expected to do. So you want that buy-in from employees, so you want them to engage as much as possible. And then this last bullet is to ensure you're documenting. So from an HR standpoint, documentation is key. Whether you're a organization under 500 employees right now and you're sticking with the FFCRA guidelines, documentation is key. All aspects of HR really encompasses documentation to some degree, where you're able to make sure that the employee's clear on how they're doing and you're clear on how they're doing, so that if somebody isn't working out, there's no surprises. So I would argue that documentation it can be a very positive way to capture the success of people, as well as that feedback that helps them course correct, but it should be collaborative. And so what does that mean? Well, in some cases, you may want to put in a new tool. You may want to put in a performance management tool, and this might be a good time for that. It might not. I realize every nonprofit out there is going to be different. Financial situation is going to be different, but it's something to think about, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well as we go on.
I just want to add, James commented, we've implemented a weekly dashboard outcomes report, and the staff seem to appreciate it, as it shows how to track their own work and stay on task a little easier. And I think that really hits to your point of making it outcome based, and then giving that feedback to them very promptly to say, yes, you're making those outcomes happen. So I just wanted to share that from James.
That's excellent. Thank you. So this slide, as I was talking about performance reviews, right, we don't want people jumping off the cliff when they think about having to do reviews for 20 people that don't want to sit down with their manager a year out and establish how they're doing. It's pretty scary from everybody's perspective. So to James' point, this is an aspect where we want to add in this visual component. So I'm going to talk about what was given as an example here in this slide as well. So driving performance and creating accountability. You want to make sure that you're creating a link between the strategy of the organization, your nonprofit mission, your initiatives. You want to connect people to those, but you want to do it in a transparent way, a visual way. And this is a key component that kind of ties in all of these four ideas here of alignment, engagement, transparency, and recognition. You want people to feel and see the work that's getting done throughout the organization and their piece in it to allow them to feel more engaged. And it takes care of the recognition component. So recognition doesn't have to mean you give extra bonuses. Recognition can be just this visual component. So you've got some way to capture the work that's getting done, that outcome-based work that's getting done, the progress towards those that work that's getting done on an employee basis, on a organizational basis, and you want to be able to share successes. So that's really what recognition is about, the ongoing feedback to the success or the course correction, and then including that ability to connect everyone to that work. It's always key to be open and honest and give clear feedback. So if you have somebody who you don't feel is keeping up, or you're worried that there's ongoing issues, they should know that there's ongoing issues. That person should know how they're doing on a regular basis. We really, really want to encourage that open communication.
I'd like to add one piece to that, and that is that I look at this as a mind shift for managers. Managers sometimes don't want to give the feedback because it feels difficult and it's easier to just ignore it. But really, the thing that's different is to look at it as this is what the most fair thing is to do for that employee. So if you want to do the right thing is to have those ongoing conversations and to provide that feedback. That's what gives your employee the best opportunity to make changes and to achieve the goals that was set between the employee and manager. So just think of it as it's not a frustrating and difficult thing to do. It is the most fair thing to do for your employee. And that as managers, you always want to do what's most fair for your employee.
Awesome, thank you, Nancy. Okay, so this slide is from an employee standpoint. The next slide is from a manager standpoint. So it kind of takes what we've been talking about to the next level. So what's important for the employees to be aware of or to participate in? They need to create their own primary job responsibilities, and maybe they already have done that, or maybe that's already been decided for them. You still want them to feel that buy-in to the work that they're doing. So maybe this is a good time to revisit that. Maybe it's a good time to clarify what their role is. If you have the extra time and you have the bandwidth for those conversations, I would encourage that. Are they performing against expectations in their roadmap forward? So I would argue that the roadmap forward is one that I think everybody recognizes is a little unknown for many organizations, but still to communicate about where they are today, what the expectations of them are today, even though they may change tomorrow, to keep that communication open. and to have those conversations about what's ahead, even if it's going to shift or potentially shift. And then how their efforts contribute to meeting organizational initiatives. We already talked about this. This is the transparency component and that ability to see their part in the larger picture and the larger mission of the organization. And then the entire strategy and how they fit, as I just mentioned. Okay, next slide. So managers should know what their employees are thinking and feeling, right? So they should always have a sense of this, how their employees are performing against expectations and their roadmap forward, and then the employee's strengths and weaknesses. So this is a good one. So to our earlier point, when an employee is not necessarily doing the work that we hope they might, they need to be clear on that. But if they're doing really well and they're showing some incredible strengths and maybe they're being stepping up during this shift in how we're operating, maybe we need to acknowledge them more often. And so honor those people's strengths and address those weaknesses and document. And then ideally, we want to be teaching our managers how to be great coaches.
And Jill, just to add one more thing to this, the importance of this now in a remote environment is even greater than it was before, and it was pretty big before. But making sure that your employees really understand this, are hearing your feedback, are hearing where they're doing well, is so important when you're remote because they don't see you all the time. They may see you, they may, if you may walk by somebody's desk and say, oh, that was a great job, but you don't think about doing it when you're remote because you don't visually see them. So all of this is just up a notch when you're working in a remote environment.
And let me just also, thank you, Nancy. Let me also just mention that when we say great coaches, it really refers to providing the framework for managers to do what we're talking about, which are those ongoing conversations, giving that feedback, highlighting their strengths, identifying those weaknesses. So great coaches are not micromanaging. Great coaches are helping to facilitate the growth of their employees and helping them to evolve. So we've really kind of touched on all of these pieces, but I wanted to provide a visual of how there's sort of this circular motion to it all. So you want to make sure that your nonprofit has the mission is clear, but which I'm sure it is, but are your initiatives clear? So your strategy for your nonprofit, make sure that even as that shifts, and if it shifts, make sure that the communication is constantly there. People know what that is, and then connecting people to it. And then this execution piece is around making sure you have a well-oiled machine of a process to continuing to do this, right? So this is an ongoing process of connecting people to your mission, your strategy, and your key initiatives, identifying the work that people are doing, supporting that environment by connecting with people, giving feedback, having ongoing conversations, staying outcome-based, and doing it on an ongoing basis. So this is really what I want to mention in terms of tools. So we've had questions come up about, okay, you talked about all these things. If we do have the bandwidth and the financial wherewithal to implement a tool at this point, what would that look like? And so there's tools out there for a lot of the work we're doing. There's tools for communication like Slack, and Microsoft Teams are key right now to keep those video conversations going. Zoom is great for video. And, maybe you have Google calendaring. I mean, there's various tools out there for various functions. A lot of human resource information systems or management systems out there also have performance components. And those could be a really solid way to address performance at this point. But the ideal here is what I wanted to put out. The ideal scenario is that you want to look for a tool that supports your performance management processes with that has coaching framework to support managers for having those ongoing conversations and giving that feedback, and that goes both ways between an employee and a manager, that you're aligning your employees to the mission, to the initiatives, as I was talking about in that last slide, and that transparency is a key piece of it. So you have a visual component. And again, you may be getting this in other ways. So if you're getting this in other ways besides a performance tool, that's great. Just these are the key pieces you want to be trying to implement. Regular performance conversations, and then allowing for course correction. So what does that mean? So when we set objectives and when we set our goals, we may hit obstacles. We may have to re-look at that goal because what we're trying to do is no longer, maybe our initiative changed. Maybe we can't get our trucking deliveries can't happen anymore. I mean, whatever that is, we may have obstacles and we may need to identify those and course correct. So you want these 5 components to be available to you as an organization to really support this remote work when you are not face-to-face. There are 3 tools that we identified here as tools that could support this in various ways. We use a tool called Insights. 2020 Insights is the name of the company. It's one that we use to engage with our team and how we support our consultants who are working with our clients. That includes all of these 5 components. Small Improvements is also a good alternative. It also supports most of these components. 15.5 comes close as well. So I encourage organizations that can implement a tool at this point to look at those. And you know, the thought came up of maybe our team wants to do a demo of Insights and how we utilize the tool. We're happy to do that if that's of interest. So send a shout out if that's of interest and we can schedule a demo.
So while I go through these last couple of slides, if you have any last questions, please feel free to send them through the Q&A function. Sorry for the background noise. So a couple of slides first, just all of our offices throughout the West Coast now. We've expanded in recent years. If you've been familiar with our nonprofit leadership team, here is our image or pictures here. And then any questions? I know one question that I had, Nancy and Jill, as I was listening to your presentation is, one of the questions that I get, you talked earlier about anxiety and uncertainty within the workforce right now. And a lot of questions is, if I do this wrong, am I going to have a problem? Am I going to be furloughed? Am I going to be laid off? How can coaches kind of give good feedback and provide kind of assurances during this time? What's a good coaching style when in all of this uncertainty?
I think there's one word that is the way that all conversations should be based, and that's transparency. So ensuring that your managers have the answers, understand what's going on, and can share that information. And that may mean saying, I don't know. It's better to say, I don't know if you don't know, and it's just better to be truthful and transparent about that. You're not going to be able to know everything, and we've been running into this a lot because laws are changing every single day. We're trying to keep on top of all of this, and things are changing. So getting comfortable with saying, we don't know, we are looking into this, and we will get back to you, and then following that up and getting back, I think is really all that you can do.
And I would add to that that to your point, Melody, about anxiety, you know, I can give you an example of an entity that I'll give you two examples actually, and an entity that there's concern amongst employees about taking PTO because they think it'll be looked at negatively. And during this time, should we really be taking vacations? And so this requires that leadership communication on a regular basis. Maybe you're doing that twice as much as you were before. Maybe it's 3 times as much. I would also encourage open-ended questions for managers and employees so that you get an opportunity for employees to not ask, but to offer what is on their mind. If they are anxious about something, you want to be able to have them speak about it. And so open-ended questions on how are you dealing with what's happening right now, making sure that those check-ins are happening and people are prompted to offer what's going on for them.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, I was going to say one other example, sorry. Something I didn't mention earlier. I know of another entity that is, and this is probably not happening with anybody on the call, but I just want to flag it. So where a leader in an organization is asking employees to check in with a video conference every morning at 8:30 and every afternoon at the end of the day, and asking them to be dressed for the call. So dictating that they get dressed and not wear their pajamas, and making sure that they're on the calls in the morning and the afternoon to prove that they're working. So I would argue this is not what you don't want to do, and is micromanaging and creating resentment.
So that actually plays into our next question a little bit. Do you have any suggestions for dealing with Zoom fatigue between calls with the team, nonstop calls with vendors, volunteers? How do you combat, or how do you help your staff combat the Zoom fatigue of constantly feeling like you can't get work done and you're just communicating?
It's a good one. It's a good one.
I would say you implement some of the processes we talked about earlier, where you have maybe quiet Fridays so that there's no video calls and no emails on certain days or certain times. I also think the same best practices you use in the office of, is this a meeting that we really need to have? Is it better that this just be a one-on-one? Not having meetings to talk about scheduling meetings kind of thing. So really think about the meetings that you are having, and are they important, and do they need to happen? Because everybody, we're all on video calls all day long now. And so you want to make sure that those calls count and are important. And then again, adhering to what we talked about earlier, to the 5-day a week, stick to those hours, and then take your time on the weekends to refresh and do what you need to do to be ready for the next week.
Yeah, and I would also add to that you know, you want to encourage people to be visual, especially for those people who are being more isolated and need that connectedness. But I don't feel like you should mandate it, right? So if people are not feeling like they want their faces to show, or are needing to kind of step back during a Zoom call, giving people the flexibility to do that, and maybe say, you know, you're going to feel like being visual one day and maybe you're not the next, and that's okay. But as much as we can encourage that, we want to encourage the visual connectedness.
Jill, that actually plays into a next question. How do you deal with staff who are resistant to attempts at team building, icebreakers, mandatory fun? What do you do when the staff kind of rejects how you are trying to lead the organization in that way?
Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
I would say there's really nothing you can do about it, and it's okay. If they don't want to be on an additional meeting, if they don't want to participate in that, it's really their choice. Forcing them or trying to get them to do it is not the way to go. You hope that they will and that there's something that they want to participate in, but if they don't and they want to use that time for themselves to regroup, that's okay.
And I might also suggest that you maybe schedule an opportunity for everybody to come together on a social platform, maybe do it once a month, and check it out with employees before and say, we're going to make this a voluntary, not mandated participation, and really structure it and request for feedback. And so if generally employees don't want to do something like that, then maybe your environment doesn't promote it. But kind of take a pulse and ask for whether that is something people want to participate. My guess is some do and some don't, and they may not want to speak up, so maybe you try it.
There's one other thing to add to that is that I know in many of the nonprofits that I worked in that they didn't have events that had alcohol because there were people dealing with those kinds of issues either with clients or within the staff. And so when you start hearing about, oh, this company's having a happy hour, think about your organization and what would work. A happy hour with alcohol may not be right for you, but a get together with family or pets or whatever, that may work better in your environment. So really think about the environment you're in and what would potentially be of interest to your employees. And you're never going to get everybody, so you just do the best that you can do.
Okay, one more question, or maybe I'll have two more, but another question. How do you provide the personal contact and mental health benefits of seeing people without having to regularly schedule staff meetings?
Yeah, I feel like we kind of covered that in the last conversation. I mean, I feel like those activities where people can come together and do happy hour and have the families participate. One other thought along those lines is to highlight people's creative abilities. And like we have a pianist on our team that we just found out recently, and we're going to have her perform, and she wants to perform for the team and just show that personal aspect off. That's awesome. So, open that up to your employees and see if people want to share their creative strengths. Give those platforms, promote those kind of platforms.
So one last question, and I kind of teed this up with you before, Jill, is just overall, where do you see this crisis changing the way all teams and organizations operate going forward?
Yeah, so I think this is a lot of what we talked about, right? This is the remote work and doing that in a way where good management is really highlighted, I think is the wave of the future. I think that is how we're going to be dealing with the success of those nonprofits and for-profits organizations versus not. People have got to come together as a culture and really form those bonds in a way to support each other and be compassionate and highlight people's strengths and honor people's weaknesses and deal with those weaknesses. But, having this be the new cadence and the new way we engage with each other. I think this is a positive because it's really going to promote this in a way that maybe people and companies and nonprofits didn't make as a priority before.
And I have something to add because this is my favorite question. I've been promoting working in a remote environment and allowing people to work remotely for many, many, many years. And I've heard everything about how you can't possibly collaborate when you work remotely, or you can't get things done. And I have fought that battle and dealt with that many times in my life. So for me, as difficult as this shelter in place has been, I think it's proven that actually people can work from home and they can still collaborate and they can get things done in a way that works for them, in a time frame that works for them. So I think this is going to change many organizations going forward. I think more people will be working remotely. I think some organizations may never go back to working in an office. And I'm not saying that's the right or wrong way to do it, but I do feel like having this sort of test period for all of us has been good to see that we can make this work for our employees. And the more we do that, the happier they are, the more they feel that they're able to work in an environment that works for them, the more they're going to do to support your mission.
Hear, hear.
Excellent. Thank you both, Jill and Nancy. I greatly appreciate putting together this, having the opportunity to moderate it for you. I think it's a great topic right now. I did want to just bring up, we do have a resource center on our BPM CPA website with resources around COVID-19. I want to say thank you. Coming up, we do have 2 webcasts scheduled. May 14th again, Digital Transformation in the Age of COVID-19. July 23rd, this is our annual accounting and tax update. Those sessions will be open for registration soon on BPM, so look for your emails or check the website if you haven't seen anything from us as those dates get closer. If there are any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Nancy, Jill, or myself, and we're happy to get answers back to you. And then finally, again, your last reminder, the SurveyMonkey, if it hasn't already hit your email, will be hitting your email shortly. Please enter those 5 words if you are looking for CPE credit for this presentation. It will close half an hour after the end of today's class, and no CPE can be granted after that time. Thank you again for joining us all today. We really appreciate, thank you. Oh, and yes, there will be a recorded session, I believe. Jeanette, I'm sorry, I meant to answer that earlier. I do believe, and I'm looking for confirmation, but I do believe that this, along with all of our other webcasts, are available on the website. If there's anything else, thank you. Everyone have a great day.